Vector stared at the small pot on his windowsill. The plant inside was dull, slow-growing, painfully ordinary. What if I speed up the growth, he thought. He opened the green bottle, dripped a few drops onto the soil, and 30 minutes later his entire lab had become a jungle. Vector had a problem. A wilted plant on his windowsill. 3 months of care, 3 months of daily watering, zero growth. Every single morning he'd check on it. Water it carefully. Make sure it got enough sunlight. Rotate the pot for even light distribution. Nothing worked. The plant stubbornly stayed the same. 3 pathetic leaves, 4 inches tall, unchanging, mocking him. Why so slow, he muttered one morning, coffee in hand. Of course it was slow. Plants naturally grew at their own pace. Weeks became months. Patience was required. But Vector wasn't a patient person. Never had been. He turned away from the window, walked to his desk, opened his worn notebook to a dog-eared page. There was a project he'd started weeks ago but never finished. Accelerated growth formula. The notes were scattered, half-formed ideas, chemical compounds, rough calculations, all theoretical. In theory, it was elegantly simple. Boost the plant's growth hormones, speed up cellular division, accelerate the natural processes. Result: faster growth. In practice, he'd never tested it. Too risky, he'd thought back then. Too unpredictable. But now, staring at that pathetic wilted plant, he reconsidered. Maybe now's the time, he said to the empty lab. This is where everything changed. Vector pulled out his equipment, began preparing the formula from memory, mixing compounds carefully, measuring precisely. The result was a green liquid, bright, almost neon. It shimmered under the lab lights. Beautiful, really. He held the bottle up, examined it. The liquid seemed to glow with promise. Just a few drops, he told himself. No need to get too ambitious. Small test. See what happens. He grabbed a small dropper from his desk drawer, approached the plant slowly, held the dropper steady over the soil exactly where he knew the roots were concentrated. 3 drops fell. Plip, plip, plip. The green liquid absorbed into the dry soil, disappeared like water into sand. Vector stepped back, set the dropper down, waited. At first, absolutely nothing happened. The plant sat there. Same as before. Wilted. Pathetic. Unchanged. Well, he sighed. Maybe the effect is slow. Could take hours. He returned to his desk, tried to focus on another experiment. Opened his laptop, reviewed data, took notes. But his eyes kept drifting back to that plant. 2 minutes passed, then he heard something, a sound. Very faint, almost imperceptible. A soft crackling, like paper slowly crinkling. He glanced up, stared at the plant, and froze completely. But when the plant stopped, Vector's face changed. Because it hadn't stopped. Not at all. The leaves were expanding, right before his eyes. The stem was stretching, growing taller, visibly, measurably, impossibly fast. One leaf expanded outward, greener than before, more vibrant, full of life. The second leaf stretched upward, reaching for the ceiling. The third unfolded like a fan opening. And then, something incredible happened. A fourth leaf shot out from the stem. Fast, like it was spring-loaded, burst forth and immediately began growing. Whoa, Vector whispered, standing up slowly. The height continued increasing. The stem thickened before his eyes. More leaves appeared. 5, 6, 7, 8. Vector jumped to his feet, moved closer. Couldn't believe what he was seeing. It was working. The formula was actually working. His hands trembled as he pulled out his phone, opened the camera, began recording video. He had to capture this, document it. This was scientific history in the making. He watched through the phone screen, narrating quietly. 3 minutes since application. Plant has doubled in size. Growth rate exponential. Leaves multiplying rapidly. In those first 3 minutes, the plant had completely doubled. Leaves spilled over the pot's edges. Hung down toward the desk. At 5 minutes, the stem no longer fit properly in the pot. It pressed against the ceramic sides. At 7 minutes. That's when something cracked. A sharp sound. Ceramic breaking. The pot exploded. Shards scattered across the desk. Soil erupted everywhere. Roots burst outward violently, thick and pale, reaching desperately toward the floor like grasping fingers. Vector jumped backward. What's happening? The plant was free now, liberated from its ceramic prison, and it showed no signs of stopping. The roots hit the lab floor, immediately began searching, found tiny cracks in the concrete, drove into them with surprising force, anchored themselves, held on tight. The growth accelerated even more. At 10 minutes, the main stem had reached Vector's waist level. At 15 minutes, it was at his chest. At 20 minutes, it had passed his height entirely. Vector's heart raced wildly. This growth was too fast. Way, way too fast. This wasn't natural. This wasn't right. Okay, he said to himself, trying to stay calm. It'll stop at some point. Has to. Resources will run out. Growth will plateau, but it didn't stop. Not even close. 30 minutes later, Vector couldn't believe what he was seeing. The top of the plant had touched the ceiling, made contact with the white tiles above. And even then, it continued rising, pressing upward. Branches began spreading sideways, seeking space, hit the table surface, wrapped around the shelves, coiled around expensive equipment, knocked over beakers. There were so many leaves now that they cast deep shadows across the entire lab. The bright fluorescent light struggled to penetrate the green canopy forming overhead. Vector felt panic rising in his chest. Stop! Please stop! The plant didn't care about his pleas. Side branches appeared along the main trunk. They grew horizontally, climbed toward the window, scaled the wall like vines. Leaves pressed against the glass. No, no, no! Vector ran forward, grabbed one of the thicker branches with both hands, pulled hard. The branch snapped off, broke cleanly, but within seconds, 2 more grew in its place. Thicker than before, stronger, more aggressive. Vector stared in horror. The plant wasn't just rising anymore, it was multiplying, reproducing, spreading like a virus. He tried to cut it, but Vector sprinted to his tool drawer, grabbed scissors, sharp ones. Ran back. He cut frantically. 1 branch, 2 branches, 3 branches. But he couldn't keep up with the growth rate. For every single branch he managed to cut, 3 more sprouted immediately. The math was against him. Sweat poured down his face, soaked his shirt. His hands shook from exertion. His breath came in short gasps. It won't stop! He yelled at the uncaring plant. It'll never stop. 35 minutes since application. Half the lab was consumed by green. Branches had covered everything. The desk was invisible. The shelves were swallowed. Equipment was trapped. Vector was completely out of breath, exhausted. The scissors in his trembling hand weren't working anymore. The branches had grown too thick, too woody. They resisted the blades. He dropped the scissors. They clattered on the floor. The formula, he thought desperately. There must be something to stop the formula. A reversal agent. Something. But the formula was in his notebook, and his notebook was on his desk, and his desk was now completely buried under a mountain of branches. He had no choice. He dropped to his hands and knees, began crawling through the dense branches. It was like navigating a jungle. Leaves slapped his face repeatedly. Branches blocked his path at every turn. He pushed through. His hand reached out. Felt the edge of the desk. Almost there. Finally, his fingers closed around the notebook. Got it. But then, a branch wrapped around his wrist, coiled tight like a snake. What? Vector struggled against it, pulled hard. The branch was so tight it cut off circulation. He tore at it desperately with his other hand, ripped leaves, broke smaller branches, finally freed himself, fell backward onto the floor. He lay there, panting, staring up at the ceiling, except he couldn't see the ceiling anymore. Just green. Endless green. 40 minutes. The plant had now pressed firmly against the ceiling tiles. Branches were spreading horizontally across the entire surface, covering the lights. The lab grew dimmer. When he reached the lab door, it was too late. Vector scrambled to his feet, ran to the exit, grabbed the door handle. The door wouldn't budge. It was covered too. Branches had grown over it, around it, through the gap underneath. They held the door shut like natural chains. He pushed, shoved hard, used his shoulder. The branches were so tight, so interwoven, the door wouldn't move even an inch. 45 minutes. Vector leaned against the blocked door, tried to catch his breath, tried to think clearly, but the air felt strange, different, dense, humid, thick. The plant was producing so much oxygen that the atmospheric composition had actually changed. The air was too rich, made him lightheaded. Think, he commanded himself. Think. How do you stop it? There has to be a way. What did plants need to grow? He ran through the basics: water, sunlight, nutrients, carbon dioxide. Wait, light. Plants needed light for photosynthesis. If he could cut off the light source, growth would stop. Had to. He turned toward the window, started running, or tried to run. Branches wrapped around his legs mid-stride, tangled around his ankles. He stumbled, lost balance, fell hard. He hit the floor face first. Pain shot through his nose. Blood came. He was surrounded by leaves, trapped. Green everywhere. Above, below, all sides. That night something happened. Nobody expected. Vector stayed there, on the cold lab floor, inside the plant, unable to move, unable to escape, completely trapped. 50 minutes, 60 minutes, 90 minutes. He stopped tracking time, stopped struggling, just lay there in the green darkness. After what felt like 2 hours, he noticed something. The growth had begun slowing. The constant rustling sound of expanding leaves had quieted. The crackling of stretching stems had decreased. Very slowly, the plant was decelerating. After what must have been 3 hours, the movement stopped entirely, completely stopped. Vector remained on the floor, exhausted beyond measure. Every muscle ached. His hands were cut, his clothes torn, his spirit broken. Around him was a giant forest, a massive ecosystem. Branches stretched from floor to ceiling, roots wrapped around walls. Leaves covered every single inch of available space. His lab was gone, transformed. It looked like a greenhouse, a jungle, a wild, untamed place. Vector slowly, painfully got to his feet. Surveyed the scene properly. Moonlight filtered through the leaves. The window was still there somewhere, blocked but present. The pale light created strange shadows. What did I do? He whispered to the silent forest. He began moving through the branches. Carefully, slowly. Made his way back to where his desk should be. He found his notebook. Somehow. Still there under layers of leaves. He opened it. Studied the formula by moonlight. Tried to understand. Where had he made the mistake? What had gone wrong? And then he saw it. A calculation error. A decimal point in the wrong place. The concentration was 10 times stronger than intended. 10 times. The plant had done something Vector never predicted. The formula hadn't just accelerated growth. It had fundamentally changed the plant's entire biological system. Rewritten its genetic code. Transformed it at a cellular level. This wasn't a normal plant anymore. It wasn't even close. It was out of control, unstoppable, self-sustaining, a monster of his own creation. And worse, far worse, the formula was irreversible. The changes were permanent. It would stay like this, forever. Vector collapsed to his knees, put his head in his hands, felt tears coming. Idiot, he said to himself, voice cracking. Such an idiot. Hours passed in darkness. The sun eventually set completely, but moonlight continued filtering through the dense canopy. Silver beams through green leaves. Vector sat there among the roots. Thought. Tried to process. Made plans. By the time morning light began creeping in, he'd found only 3 realistic options. Option 1. Completely remove the plant. Cut it down, dig out the roots, reclaim the lab. But that was impossible. It was far too big now, too established. The roots had probably broken through the concrete into the earth below. Option 2. Abandon the lab entirely, walk away, leave it. But that was possible, theoretically. Though, what would happen to the plant then? Would it keep growing, break through the walls? Consume the entire building? The whole block? Option 3, learn to live with it. Accept the new reality. Prune it, maintain it. Keep it under control through constant management. Finally, he found the solution, but the cost was heavy. Day 1 of cleanup. Vector found tools, a saw, pruning shears, heavy gloves. He began cutting yards of branches. His arms ached terribly. His hands swelled. Blisters formed, but he kept going, had to. Day 2, the main trunk's turn came. He'd been avoiding it, but it had to be done. Scissors were useless. The trunk was too thick, too solid. He grabbed the largest saw he owned, began cutting, worked for hours. His arms locked up from exhaustion, but eventually, finally, he cut through the trunk. It fell with a massive crash. Day 3, he reclaimed part of the lab, cleared a path, made space. Could see the floor again in some areas, but he was tired. So tired. Every muscle screamed, but he continued. Day 4, he pruned more carefully, cleaned methodically, started organizing the chaos, made piles of cut branches, bags of leaves. Day 5, he could finally access his desk again, could see his equipment. Some of it was ruined, crushed, but some had survived. Day 6, he managed to open the window. Fresh air rushed in. Real air, not the thick, oxygen-rich atmosphere. He stood there breathing it in, nearly cried. Day 7, finally, the plant became manageable, controllable. It was still giant, enormous. The main trunk remained, standing from ceiling to floor like a pillar. But Vector had cleared around it, created zones, made the lab functional again? Barely. Half office, half greenhouse. A strange hybrid space. Days turned to weeks. 1 week, then 2 weeks passed. Each and every day, Vector tended to it. Pruned carefully, watered appropriately, maintained the balance, kept it from overgrowing again. And slowly, gradually, surprisingly, he adjusted. Got used to it. He began noticing things. The plant was actually beautiful. Truly beautiful. The leaves were a vibrant green. It smelled amazing, fresh, clean, alive. It cleaned the air constantly. The lab had never had such good air quality. But he never forgot. Not for a single day. Never forgot his mistake, his hubris, his failure. He sat at his partially cleared desk one evening. Opened his notebook to a blank page. Wrote carefully, "Growth accelerator formula, successful." Too successful, extremely successful. Never use again, ever. Some things should stay at their natural pace. Nature's speed exists for a reason. Respect it. He closed the notebook, picked up the green bottle from where it had fallen, still half full. He placed it on the highest shelf, stuck a huge warning label on it. Danger, do not use. Seriously, don't. Next to the bottle, he placed a printed photo, a screenshot from his phone video. The plant in its first 3 minutes. Small, controllable, innocent, a reminder, a warning to his future self. Sometimes success is too much success. A month later, an old friend visited Vector, someone he hadn't seen in months, a colleague from his university days. When Vector opened the lab door, his friend's jaw dropped, literally hung open. "What the heck is this?" his friend exclaimed, eyes wide. "Vector! What happened here?" Vector smiled wearily, gestured at the green chaos. "An experiment. Got a little out of control." His friend stepped inside carefully, stared upward, the massive trunk, branches climbing the walls like wooden serpents, leaves covering every surface, hanging from the ceiling, creating a canopy. "A little?" his friend repeated, disbelieving. "A little? This is insane. This is..." Vector shrugged. "Okay, fine. Way out of control. Massively out of control." The two of them stood under the canopy. Leaves swayed gently above them in a slight breeze from the window, created patterns of light and shadow. "Do you regret it?" his friend asked quietly, turning to face him. "Honestly, do you regret doing this?" Vector thought. Thought for a long, long time. Considered the question seriously. "No," he finally said. Meant it. "I don't regret it, because I learned something important, something valuable." "What?" his friend asked, curious. Vector gazed upward at the massive plant, then turned to face his friend, met his eyes. "Nature has a pace, a rhythm, a balance when we try to force it." He pointed up at the towering trunk. "This happens. Chaos, loss of control. Nature pushes back." His friend nodded slowly. Understanding. "Makes sense, actually." Vector laughed. A genuine laugh. First one in weeks. "Or maybe," he added, "maybe I should just work with smaller plants. Stick to succulents. Less ambitious species." The two of them talked for another hour, caught up, shared stories. Then his friend left, still shaking his head in amazement. As Vector closed the lab door, he glanced back one last time at his green companion. It was still there. Giant, green, powerful, alive. Not a mistake. A lesson. A teacher. A reminder of hubris and humility. The green bottle sat on its shelf. Locked in a cabinet now. Safe. Secure. Maybe one day he'd find the right amount, the right concentration, the right balance, the right speed, but not today. Not soon. Today he watered his plant, pruned the new growth, and accepted it exactly as it was. The plant swayed gently in response, as if it understood, as if it agreed. Vector stared at it, really looked at it, for a long, long time, then smiled genuinely. "All right," he said softly to his green companion. "Peace. We're good. We're okay." And somehow, impossibly, it felt true.